It's 2:06 a.m. The screen glows blue in a dark home office. Shan Haines sits alone, hand hovering over the mouse, about to wire $10 million to a crypto wallet he can't verify. Sweat beads on his forehead, despite the hum of the air conditioning. He clicks, and with that, another fortune vanishes. But let's start at the beginning. I'm Steve Rode, and this is True Crime Cases You Haven't Heard. Each week, I bring you one true crime story, pulled from court filings, public records, and overlooked news reports. These are about people who weren't supposed to break the rules, but did. What you're about to hear may be the first documented case of an international pig butchering scam destroying an American financial institution. While these scams have stolen billions from individuals, Shan Haines' case represents something unprecedented. The moment this digital age fraud reached into the heart of American banking itself. Before we begin, I want you to listen carefully to this entire episode because at the end, I'm going to ask you an important question about justice, forgiveness, and what we owe to the people who betray us. I would really love to hear your thoughts. Everything in this episode is based on public records and reporting. Yes, I actually read all those court documents, so you don't have to. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Although, I can't promise you won't learn something despite my best efforts to make it entertaining. Elkhart, Kansas sits in the far southwest corner of the state. It leans right up against the Oklahoma state line. Some people would dismiss it as just another small rural town in flyover country, but what happened here matters more than you can possibly imagine. This case changed how institutions operate, shattered a community's trust in ways that are still healing, and revealed how an institutional banking mistake led to an international financial tragedy, with bad people robbing from the rich and poor alike. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because first you need to understand what Elkhart really is. It's a place where everyone knows your name, where church bulletins double as social calendars, and where loyalty is as common as wind across the plains. It's a town of just under 2,000, where people's lives are intertwined in ways common to rural communities. Parents know each other's parents. Children play together. Trust isn't just expected, it's the foundation of everything. Shan Haines fit right in. He grew up just miles away, raised on a farm in a small agricultural community, operating farm equipment by third grade. He was a star student with a 3.96 GPA from Northwestern Oklahoma State University, and additional training at the prestigious Graduate School of Banking in Colorado. He married his college sweetheart, Michelle, raising 3 daughters together while deeply involved in their activities. Starting as a loan officer at the First National Bank of Elkhart in 1993, he worked his way up to president. And when that bank was sold in 2008, Haines became president of the new Heartland Tri-State Bank. His influence extended far beyond Elkhart. He testified as a knowledgeable banking expert before both the U.S. House and Senate on rural banking policy. He chaired the Kansas Bankers Association from 2021 to 2022, right before the beginning of his end as a banker. He served on the American Bankers Association board and on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau Committee for community banks. Locally, he served on the school board while coaching youth sports and serving as a church elder. He was everywhere in Elkhart, coaching on sidelines, delivering lessons on morality and trust, and in Washington, D.C., helping to shape federal banking policy. He was the kind of guy who personally cut the grass at the bank, the sort of thing that endeared him to the community. He didn't just run the bank. In Elkhart, he was the bank. But on July 28th, 2023, his name would vanish from the sign downtown, and his reputation right along with it. December 2022. A cold winter day in southwest Kansas. Shan Haines receives what he probably thought was an innocent WhatsApp message from an unidentified stranger. The conversation starts casually but quickly steers towards cryptocurrency. He's interested. It's the beginning of the end. It was the right message at the right time if you were a thief. The scam is known as pig butchering. The term comes from the practice of slowly fattening up a pig before slaughter. Here's how it works. Step 1. The scammers cast a wide net through messaging apps, looking for financially comfortable targets. Step 2. They build trust over weeks or months, becoming your confidant, your insider, and your friend. Step 3. They introduce cryptocurrency trading as a casual opportunity. Hey, you want to try a small amount? Step 4. The victim invests some small amount and sees impressive returns on a convincing fake website. The victim can even withdraw small amounts to build confidence. Step 5. Hey, you see how well you're doing? Imagine if you invested more, the scammer says. The victim, watching their fake balance grow, invest larger amounts. Step 6. When the victim tries to withdraw their money, the scammers demand taxes or fees or claim there are technical problems. But there is no fortune. There never was. January 2023. Haines transfers $5,000 from his personal bank account to a cryptocurrency exchange. The hook is set. By late January, his fake account shows impressive profits. When he tries to invest more, he's told he needs additional funds to unlock the next tier of returns. That's when Shan Haines crosses his first line. But first, he gambles with his own money. His personal financial devastation begins. $5,000 from his personal account at Heartland Tri-State Bank. $30,000 from his personal savings account at Bank of the Panhandle. $60,000 from his daughter's college fund. Her future education gone. Over $100,000 in personal loans he takes out, desperately chasing losses. And then $964,000 of his own stock in Elkhart Financial Corporation. His total personal loss? More than $1.1 million. But that's still not enough for the scammers. So he crosses the line into other people's money. Late January 2023, he takes $30,000 from the Elkhart Church of Christ Building Fund. April 2023, another $10,000 from the same church's benevolence fund. That's money meant for families facing medical bills or job loss. And then $10,000 from the Santa Fe Investment Club, a group of local retirees trying to stretch their savings. He even uses accounts at other banks to quietly move money. Bank of the Panhandle, Metropolitan Commercial Bank. Through May 2023, Haines makes approximately 9 wire transfers to MCB, totaling $268,400. But it's still not enough. The scammers tell him the funds need to go to a different exchange now, Payward Ventures, which connects to Kraken cryptocurrency exchange. And now they've refined their manipulation. They tell him more funds are constantly needed to unfreeze the previously deposited funds. Each investment, they claim, will unlock everything that came before. It's a lie. It will cost him everything. But the scammers have one more card to play. When Haynes hesitates, they threaten him. They'll report him to the FBI for money laundering if he doesn't continue. The trap has completely closed. His attorneys later said he didn't eat, he didn't sleep. His wife said he stopped smiling. But he didn't stop transferring money. May 17, 2023. The first wire transfer from Heartland Tri-State Bank. $5,000. That seems small, a test. But it's the moment Shan Haynes stops being a victim and becomes the criminal. What happens next unfolds over 7 weeks. 11 wire transfers, $47.1 million. May 17th, $5,000, testing the waters. May 30th, $1.5 million. May 31st, $1.5 million. June 2nd, $3.5 million. June 2nd, $3.2 million. A transfer again on the same day. June 14th, $10 million. June 20th, $1.4 million. June 23rd, $10.3 million. June 27th, $3.3 million. July 5th, $8 million. July 7th, $4.4 million. Gone. Vanished. Lost forever. Into the digital void. Each wire transfer carried a lie. He told his staff they were for clients. He told his board it was about clearing balances. When one $8 million wire couldn't be processed due to daily limits, he convinced a bank investor to let him route the money through the investor's personal account. Throughout this series of transfers, Haynes maintained constant communication with his scammer through WhatsApp, always being told that more funds were needed to unfreeze the previously deposited money. Each new investment would supposedly unlock everything that came before. He'd be saved. But there was no unlocking, no unfreezing, just an endless cycle of theft, feeding an insatiable scam. Mandy Burton, the chief financial officer, sat at her desk processing wire transfer requests, each bearing Haynes' signature and explanation. Nothing unusual on its face except the amounts kept growing larger. Burton processed 8 of the 10 transfers because that's what her job required, to execute what the president authorized. But something gnawed at her: the frequency, the destinations, the vague explanations. In a larger bank, Burton might have escalated concerns to a compliance officer or an independent board committee. But at Heartland Tri-State Bank, there was nowhere to go. The person she would normally report suspicious activity to was the same person requesting the transfers. It's an impossible position that reveals a critical blind spot in community banking. When concentrated authority meets institutional trust, the entire oversight system can collapse. Haynes even tried to secure a $69 million loan from another institution to cover the bank's losses. The loan was denied. Federal prosecutors would later put it plainly. He wasn't investing, he was gambling with other people's money, they said. But even as the world collapsed, Haynes showed flashes of conscience. Before criminal charges were filed, he managed to repay the $40,000 stolen from his church and the $10,000 taken from the Santa Fe Investment Club. It was too little, too late. But it suggested some awareness of the magnitude of his betrayal. On July 25, 2023, a senior officer arrives at the bank. She pulls up the day's FedWire report. Something's wrong. She calls the office of the state bank commissioner. By the end of the day, regulators are in the building. The state banking regulator didn't just shut down the operation. Nope, they called in the FBI. Special Agent Sage Hemmert from the Bureau's Garden City office would lead the investigation. "I've worked white-collar cases before," Hemmert would later say. but I have never worked one with this amount of loss or with this many victims significantly affected. 3 days later, the FDIC seizes Heartland Tri-State Bank. Its assets are sold to Dream First Bank. Overnight, signs are swapped, the vault closes, and the bank? Gone. The collapse devastated the community. 33 individuals and couples lost $4.4 million in investments and $3.9 million in retirement accounts. As FBI Special Agent Hemmert explained, these weren't Silicon Valley investors. These were regular people from Southwest Kansas, with their net worth tied up in this bank. When it failed, the value of their stock went to zero because it only had one asset, Heartland Tri-State Bank. Real people suffered real losses. Bill and Sue Tucker, longtime bank investors, lost almost $670,000. Diane Bolden was hit hardest, losing $730,000 from her IRA. Jim Tucker, son of Bill and Sue, had his own $144,860 disappear. Roseanne Panther lost $118,000. Her daughter, Jo Johnson, later said they had to sell the family home, and her mother now lives in a care facility. In the aftermath, Mandy Burton, the CFO, faced investigators, regulators, and devastated shareholders. I worked 21 days straight, she later told the court, describing the exhausting series of regulatory interviews and forensic accounting that followed the collapse. But those 3 weeks couldn't answer the fundamental question. How do you build safeguards against the very person those safeguards are designed to trust? The bank structure, like so many other banks, had been designed around trust, community relationships, and the assumption that the president would never be the threat. Those safeguards were useless. They couldn't protect against the very person they assumed was protecting them. May 23, 2024, Federal Courthouse, Wichita, Kansas. In the case number 24 CR 1001301 JWB, Shan L. Haynes, now 52 years old, stood before Judge John Brooms to enter his plea. His attorney, John E. Stang, had negotiated a plea agreement with federal prosecutors, Aaron Smith and Dustin Slinkhart. But Haynes understood the stakes. He was facing up to 30 years in prison, $1 million fine, and full restitution for his crimes. The formal charge? Embezzlement by a bank officer in violation of 18 U.S.C. 656. When asked by the judge, Haynes's voice was steady. Guilty. The court found him mentally competent, acting freely and voluntarily. There was no question about his understanding of what he had done. But the plea agreement carried consequences beyond prison time. Haynes agreed to a permanent ban from the banking industry, never again allowed to serve as an officer, director, or employee of any financial institution without federal approval. A lifetime prohibition from the only career he had ever known. Judge Brooms would defer his decision on accepting the plea agreement until after reviewing a pre-sentencing report. The final reckoning would come later. August 19th, 2024. Federal Courthouse, Wichita, Kansas. The restored 1930s courthouse felt like a movie set from a John Grisham novel. 6 stories of Art Deco elegance with marble and walnut and gold leaf throughout. Depression-era murals still hang in the lobby, a reminder of the last time America's financial system shattered communities like Elkhart. Judge John Wesley Brooms sits behind his marble bench on the second floor, a yellow bow tie peeking from beneath his black robe. He rocks gently in his chair as he prepares to hear from the victims. About 30 Elkhart residents filled the left third of a gallery. Shareholders, employees, friends who had trusted the man, now sitting just yards away at the defense table. Shan Haines wears a yellow tie and blue shirt, with a somewhat rumpled suit of hard-to-define color. Maybe a relative of Brown? His hair appears recently cut, but he has chin stubble and his face is pallid. He takes notes left-handed on a legal pad. When he glances at the victims, he purses his lips. Brian Mitchell, an Elkhart resident and business owner, approaches the microphone. His voice carries the weight of a community's pain. I have tried to reconcile this in my head, Mitchell says, addressing the judge, but inescapably speaking to the very man who destroyed his town. The damage has been done to my town. I can only describe it in 2 words: pure evil. The judge stops rocking. Mo Hoots, a bank officer who worked in an adjacent office to Haines for 30 years, is in the hospital back home. His statement is read by Mitchell, while Hoots' wife, Marla, stands nearby. 30 years of working in adjacent offices, the statement begins. Did not prepare me for that level of deceit, I discovered. Patrick Overpeck, an investor, speaks directly to Haines. There's no reward that would have been worth the risk that you took. He compares the embezzlement to driving a bus of family and friends off a cliff. The only thing we're guilty of is that we trusted that man too much. Marla Harris, a Heartland investor, struggles with forgiveness. My creator says I have to forgive. I'm not ready to forgive you, Shan, but I have to. You put me in a place of having to deal with my God for something I didn't do. Dan Smith, a former vice president who worked with Haines for 30 years, asks the question haunting everyone. I'd just like to know why you would do this. For whatever reason, you burned it all to the ground. After all the victims had spoken, Judge Brooms addressed the courtroom. Does anybody want to speak for this man? None volunteered. Then it's Haines's turn to speak for himself. I had no intention of ever causing the harm I did, he says in a weak voice. He acknowledges his family will deal with his actions for the rest of their lives. To the shareholders, they were my friends and my family too. He glances over his shoulders at the victims. Sorry. He rambles about wanting to get the money back, says he was working with somebody he thought he could trust, but things got out of hand. He offers no real explanation, no insight into the 8-week spree that destroyed a community. So far, I haven't heard anything to help me understand, Judge Brooms says. The judge first turns to the victims, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who'd seen way too much human suffering. This is one of the most difficult cases I've had to deal with in terms of victim impact, he says. My suggestion to you is try to forgive that man. If you set him free, you set yourselves free. It's tough advice, he acknowledges. I know these are not easy things to put behind you. But he's already taken enough from you. And then Judge Brooms addresses Haines directly, his voice growing stronger. Your conduct has injured your community in a way that's not easily captured with words. We live in an age where people don't put much stock in truth, and there's a general lack of concern for others. But out here, on the Southern Plains, there's still a sense that community means something. A man's word is his bond. The case represents a betrayal of trust that cannot be reconciled with sentencing guidelines, he explains. In America's justice system, all people stand equal before the law. Human beings, by their very nature, need to see that justice is done, Broom says slowly and deliberately. Then he looks directly at Haynes. You knew better. You were not a fool. As an experienced bank officer, Haynes was well informed about fraud. He had many opportunities to stop his criminal behavior. A sentence is required that will deter future conduct. There is no basis for a downward variance. The court sentences the defendant to 293 months imprisonment. More than 24 years, the longest ever federal sentence in Kansas for a white-collar crime. More than even the prosecution had requested. Some victims gasp. Others put hands to their mouths. Haynes stares at the judge, a pen clutched in his left hand. The defendant is immediately remanded to custody. Haynes is directed to empty his pockets. He hands over his tie, his watch, his belt, shedding the artifacts from his former life. His hands are cuffed behind him, and he's led out of the courtroom towards Butler County Jail, 30 miles away. On the other side of the gallery, a small group of Haynes's family members begins to cry. Nobody on the victim's side says anything. No cheering, no clapping, no taunts. Brian Mitchell would later explain, "It would have been very easy at the end for us to clap and say, 'Rotten hell.' But it wasn't a celebratory moment. It was weird. You still have a hole in your stomach, and there's just no way to get a complete resolution." Haynes now resides at FCI Leavenworth, a medium-security federal prison in Kansas. He's inmate number 02016-511. It's a far cry from bank boardrooms and congressional hearing rooms. The man who once testified before the U.S. Senate about rural banking policy, who chaired the Kansas Banker Association, who helped shape federal regulations for community banks, now spends his days in a 6x8 cell. After his arrest, but before sentencing, Haynes had tried to rebuild his life. From August 2023 through April 2024, he worked for Globe Life American Income Veteran Division, marketing burial benefits to veterans. A man who had buried his own future was now selling final arrangements to others. The irony would be almost poetic if it just wasn't so tragic. It was honest work, but a stark contrast to his former role as a respected banking executive. If he serves his full sentence, Shan Haynes will miss his daughter's wedding, his grandchildren's births, his parents' funerals. 24 years of his life gone. The same way he made $47 million disappear. November 4th, 2024. 16 months after the bank's collapse, about 30 Elkhart residents gathered in a federal courtroom in Wichita for an unexpected hearing. Against all odds, federal investigators had achieved something remarkable. Behind the scenes, FBI agents were methodically tracing crypto breadcrumbs through the digital landscape. The Bureau's evolving approach to fighting emerging scams had allowed them to follow the money trail where traditional methods would have failed. The investigation illustrated both the complexities of investigating digital currencies and how law enforcement is adapting to protect communities from these sophisticated threats. Working with the FBI and the Office of Inspector General for the FDIC, they had traced Haynes' stolen funds through the complex world of cryptocurrency exchanges, Payward Ventures, Kraken, and ultimately to a specific Tether wallet address. Most of the $47 million had vanished forever. It had moved through multiple cryptocurrency accounts controlled by unidentified parties. But investigators had seized one Tether account before it could be completely drained. The recovery? $8,071,038. The question wasn't whether victims would get money back. It was who had the greater claim, the FDIC or the individual shareholders and employees who lost their life savings. Judge Brooms made his decision clear. In this case, the evidence is clear. This was a local bank operation funded by members of the community. He ordered the entire $8 million recovery to go to shareholders and employees, not the FDIC. When the judge finished reading the restitution amounts, the victims applauded. "Thank you, Judge," one called out. Mo Hoots received $455,226. About 70% of his retirement was restored. He told a reporter he'd like to visit Haynes in prison someday. What I would really like is in a couple of years to go to Leavenworth and visit with him and just ask him, why? Joe Johnson's mother got back her $118,000 investment. Johnson said the restitution would make a real difference. Her mother can now stay in the care facility without the family facing financial ruin. Jim Tucker received $144,860, but for him, the money was less important than what it meant symbolically. You see, his 93-year-old father, Bill Tucker, a founder and board chair with Heartland Tri-State Bank, had been terminally ill in the hospital when Jim told him about the recovery. He was so proud of that bank, Tucker said tearfully. It just ate him up what happened. Bill Tucker's response to the news with a raised eyebrow were 2 words. "Oh my." Tucker interpreted it as an expression of hope. Bill Tucker died on October 31st, 2024. "I'm glad I told him," Tucker said. "It gave him some peace to know his family, his friends, and his neighbors in the community wouldn't be hurt." If you drive through Elkhart today, the old Heartland building still stands, but the name's changed. The logo's gone. The trust? That's harder to replace. When a bank fails in a small town, you lose more than money. You lose part of your integrity, part of your community's foundation. The victims' restraint in that courtroom, their refusal to celebrate even as justice was served, speaks to something deeper about small-town communities. These weren't strangers seeking revenge. These were neighbors, friends, and fellow church members who had watched their children play together, who had shared decades of community life with the man who betrayed them all. In Elkhart, the victim impact statements were elliptical, in that most referenced Haynes and others as friends, neighbors, and co-workers. Their parents knew each other's parents. Their children had played together. That's what made this betrayal so devastating. This wasn't a stranger who robbed them. This was Shan, the guy who personally cut the grass at the bank, who coached their kids, who preached about Jesus' love from the church pulpit. This case exposes a dangerous vulnerability in community banking. Concentrated authority without independent oversight. When a president has broad authority and deep community trust, there's often no safe mechanism for staff to raise concerns about leadership. Had there been simple safeguards, an independent compliance officer, board notification requirements for large wire transfers, or even a policy requiring dual approval for transfers over $100,000, this catastrophe might have been contained. The bank would have survived. The community would have been bruised, but not shattered. What began in December 2022 with a simple WhatsApp message became a sophisticated psychological manipulation that represents a watershed moment in American financial crime. This appears to be the first documented case of an international pig butchering operation successfully destroying a U.S. bank. While these scams have devastated individual victims for years, Haynes' case shows us how they can now threaten the stability of financial institutions themselves. Banking regulators, law enforcement agencies, and cybersecurity experts should study this case as a blueprint for how international criminal organizations can exploit trusted community leaders to penetrate American financial infrastructure. His job, the bank's job, was to protect its customers and identify fraudulent scams, not to participate in them, said Special Agent in Charge Stephen Cyrus. U.S. Attorney Kate Brubacher put it even more bluntly. Haynes's greed knew no bounds. He trespassed his professional obligations, his personal relationships, and federal law. Not only did Shan Haynes betray Heartland Bank and its investors, but his illegal schemes also jeopardized confidence in financial institutions. But this wasn't a story of simple greed. The details from his defense reveal the full scope of his personal devastation. Haynes lost over $1 million from his own money, his daughter's college fund, his life savings, his retirement stock, personal loans he'd taken out, desperately trying to recover earlier losses. He wasn't enriching himself. He was desperately trying to recover losses that grew larger every day. This case also reveals troubling disparities in white-collar sentencing. Just weeks before Haynes received 24 years, Janet Mello was sentenced to only 16 years for stealing $108 million from the U.S. Army, more than twice Haynes's theft. Mello had spent her stolen funds on jewelry, luxury vehicles, and real estate. Haynes lost everything to scammers and received a harsher sentence. The judge sentenced Haynes to the maximum 293 months, partly as a deterrent, noting the annual cost of imprisoning him would be about $50,000, about $1 million over 20 years. Yet at 53, if he serves his full sentence, he'll be in his mid-70s upon release, with limited ability to pay meaningful restitution to his victims. So the warning is clear. If someone online promises guaranteed returns, especially through cryptocurrency, it's a scam. And if they ask you to keep the investment secret, it's still a scam. And if they demand more money to access your profits, it's definitely a scam. No exceptions. Ever. While $8 million was recovered, almost a miraculous outcome, it represents only a fraction of what was stolen, and no amount of money can restore what this community really lost: the faith that the people they trusted most would never betray them. Shan Haynes thought he was the hero of his own story, right up until he realized he was the villain. But perhaps more tragically, he was the man who lost everything for nothing. At the end of the sentencing hearing, remember I said Judge Brooms looked directly at the victims and said, "My suggestion to you is that you try to forgive this man. If you set him free, you set yourselves free. But he's taken enough from you." Should a federal judge be telling victims of financial crimes to forgive their betrayer? These people lost their life savings, their retirements, their children's college funds, all stolen by someone they trusted, someone who coached their kids and preached at their church. Is forgiveness something that genuinely helps victims heal and move forward? Or is it asking too much of people whose lives have been shattered, essentially putting the burden of emotional recovery on the victims rather than the criminal? What do you think? Visit truecrimeunheard.com. Find this episode and leave a comment with your thoughts. I genuinely want to hear your perspective on this. Thanks for listening to True Crime Cases You Haven't Heard. If this story stayed with you, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts so more people can hear stories like this. You can always visit truecrimeunheard.com to explore more cases, or send me a note. Sometimes, even when justice is served, the scars remain forever.